Hi, my name is Alex Wiseman, and I'm going to be going through an introduction to a symposium that I recently gave in Sofia, Bulgaria on October 8th, 2014. This was an introductory talk for the symposium on the International Symposium on Comparative Sciences. And so I'm going to walk through the talk as I did at the time, and so that you'll get exactly what the content of that talk was. Thanks for listening. Welcome to the inaugural session of the International Symposium on Comparative Sciences. My name is Alex Wiseman, and I'm from the Comparative and International Education Program at Lehigh University in the United States. I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Dr. Nikolai Popov from Sofia University and his extraordinary planning team for bringing us all together for this symposium. It really was his vision and their collaborative effort that's given us the opportunity to do something very special for the next few days. Throughout this symposium, we will have the opportunity to communicate across disciplinary, theoretical, and methodological boundaries. In essence, we can be fully engaged in comparing our comparative approaches to scholarship, research, and understanding. And it's a rare treat to be able to do that, but it's a challenging one too. By the end of the symposium, if we are fully engaged with one another, I truly expect that we will be able to better understand the context for comparison and the promises and challenges of comparison than we do today. And to help us focus our efforts, I've been generously given a chance to introduce the symposium. Now, I'm definitely going to talk about the nature of comparison, but I'd also like to draw our attention to the nature of comparative methodology. And so I have an alternate title of this introductory talk. We start from the basis that reflection is a necessary part of growth, just like comparison is a natural part of knowing. Yet reflection alone is neither sufficient for professional development nor significant change in the ways we compare and the reasons we compare. This inaugural session of the International Symposium on Comparative Sciences is the rare opportunity to systematically, consistently, and holistically reflect on comparative methodologies across different disciplines and fields. Each section of this symposium has been developed to provide a shared space for us to hear regional and cultural voices from different regions and fields of study, to recognize ways that comparative research in one field translates to another, and to appreciate new or underemphasized topics and issues in the comparative sciences broadly speaking. Now, there are both pitfalls and promises associated with being reflective and systematic about comparing comparative methodologies, which I'll get to in just a few minutes. But by way of introducing this symposium, I want to thank you for indulging me in touching on a couple of key areas for us to discuss and consider. And in case you're the kind of person who likes outlines, then here's where we're headed in the next few minutes. First, I'll touch on the basic characteristics of comparison and how we experience it not just in our work, but in our lives. Next, we will discuss the benefits of comparing for identifying similarities versus differences and vice versa. I will suggest some key questions that we might want to consider as we hear each other's presentations and papers this week, and we'll briefly discuss some of the ways that we can problematize the comparative method. Finally, I'll pose some of the pitfalls and promises that comparing comparative methodologies holds for us, and end by coming back to the key questions we might consider as we move forward together over the course of the symposium. So that's where we're going for the next few minutes, maybe about 30 minutes. Having said that, I'd like to begin by making what I consider to be a bold statement. And that is, it is natural to compare. Both the evidence from each of our disciplines as well as the experience of humans throughout history suggests that it is natural to compare. There's several reasons. Comparison is something we do without planning for it. It's something we take for granted because we do it so readily and so often. We do it as children when we make the first comparisons between what we have versus what others have. And we do it as adults when we attempt to understand both our own societies, systems, and situations, as well as understanding others. Comparison is, in other words, innate. We do it because we are human. And I think it is that simple. Comparison is fundamental to understanding. Not only understanding what makes one phenomenon like another, but also what makes many similar phenomena different from the others. And let me emphasize that point. Comparison is not only about looking for similarities and shared meanings. It is also, and perhaps most importantly, about finding what is unique and different. In fact, a meaningful understanding of any phenomenon requires grounding in what makes that phenomenon unique. In comparative social sciences, for example, key questions often ask how a particular phenomenon is unique in specifically contextualized communities by examining what makes it similar as well as what makes it different from phenomena in other communities. Comparison can also be about characterizations of one person, situation, or community in relation to another. For example, one of the most well-known comparisons of this sort comes from Socrates. Why does Socrates refer to himself as a gadfly in Plato's Apology? Quite simply, because he wanted to succinctly characterize himself as the one who provokes others to action. So comparison is easy. It's natural because it can be done with simple metaphor or simile. And even when done so simply, it can be done to great and impressive effect. But we have a deeper issue at stake, which we've gathered here at this symposium to address. We're here to think about our various comparative approaches, and perhaps specifically our comparative methodologies. Comparing comparative methodologies, however, is not simply about the identification of unique phenomena. It's about the overlap and integration of comparative sciences and methodologies, broadly speaking. Comparative studies in anthropology, civilization studies, economics, education, history, labor studies, law, linguistics, literature, migration studies, myth and legend studies, political science, psychology, religion, sociology, and many more seek to understand phenomena through comparison. Each of these comparative fields of scholarship or disciplinary approaches also bring a balance of contextualization and globalization in their comparative methodologies. And let me explain what I mean by that. Comparative studies are not necessarily limited by national systems or political, cultural, social, or economic boundaries, and are often global in character. For example, situating any social institution in a global context may lead us to recognize the unique impact that the institution has on individuals and their communities. But it will also be a way to shine a very bright light on the broader impact and importance of that institution. In my own field of comparative and international education, situating education as an institution in a global context emphasizes how schooling is not only a tool for educating individual students, but also for community and national development. And it shows how the broader contextual character can shape the agenda that drives or guides education worldwide. In fact, many researchers who look at education comparatively find that only through international comparison of an educational phenomenon with like phenomenon in other nations can the public and educators in particular understand the complete role of education. But comparative education is only one of many fields of comparative study, as the long list I just gave you suggests. Just like your own fields are only one of many fields where comparative frameworks and methodologies are used. In spite of the apparent similarities, there's still much to do to achieve and foster common understanding and methodologies across the comparative sciences. For example, More legitimized disciplines' comparative methodologies tend to influence or even dominate those of less legitimized disciplines. Speaking again as someone who does work in comparative education, I can say from experience that many of us who do comparative education research borrow methodologies from the social sciences quite freely. Yet there is little evidence that researchers in the social sciences, broadly speaking, borrow methods or frameworks from comparative education studies. This then is a limitation of comparing comparative methodologies that has to be considered. Which fields of comparative studies are independent or externally legitimized versus which fields of comparative studies are dependent upon the others for their comparative frameworks? As you can see, it only takes one small step to get weighed down by many important questions, which have not all been systematically or uniformly investigated. There are, in fact, several approaches to comparing comparative methodologies, and the trick is for us to do so in a way that is structured and collectively considered.